So today's lecture is going to be about Jewish mysticism, otherwise known as Kabbalah. And I'm making a disclaimer because this is really not a topic that I have expertise in. So I'm going to teach you the basics, which I know, and I think that in Kabbalah, the basics are the starting place for everyone. And after you know the basics, that gives you the tools for further learning and exploration if you so desire. So even though I'm telling you right now I'm not a Kabbalah expert, it's not something I've really delved into, I do know the basics, and I know that those basics are the tools that if you have further interest, after today's lesson, you should have some insight that will allow you to look at Kabbalah in a different way and to understand it maybe a little bit. Not that it's really very understandable, and that's the truth.
It's very hard.
It's not that it's I don't know if it's hard as much as it is. Honestly, it's very esoteric. It's an esoteric discipline, and that kind of, in a way, leaves it wide open for personal interpretation, which is, by the way, very characteristic of Judaism. Judaism is a faith which, in learning Torah, leaves itself open for interpretation. The Talmud is interpretation of the Torah, and it's all just trying to make sense of life and of man's relationship with God. And of course, human beings, when we don't understand something, it's a natural inclination to look, oh, I'm so glad that turned off. I felt like I was yelling. To look to the mysterious and to try to understand things from a mystical point of view. And mysticism is very attractive to a lot of people because it speaks to that spiritual side of you that maybe we don't really quite understand. We don't know the answers to the big questions. Why are we here? What are we really? What are we doing here? How did creation, why was creation created? For what purpose, right? These are the big questions that we just don't know. Humans don't know. And so religion and faith are ways of striving to make sense of those big questions and to at least create a scaffolding for those questions to be asked. And the Kabbalah is it's a Jewish practice, but it's the Jewish method for trying to make sense of the unknown in a mystical way. So the word, starting out from the very beginning, the word Kabbalah comes from the Hebrew root kuf bet lamed, which is kabel. Anybody know what kabel means?
To receive.
To receive. Kabel is to receive. So Kabbalah means to receive, and that's implying to receive the knowledge, and also not only knowledge, which is really the traditional Torah learning, but to receive the spiritual energy that is out there for everyone to receive. Kabbalah has an interesting history. It's accredited to long time, starting from the 1st century and the exile of the Jews from the land of Israel by the Romans. There was a group of people who were mystics who sought out mystical answers for things. It's most commonly embodied in a work of literature called the Zohar. The Zohar came out in the late 1200s. And it was the work of a man named Moses de Leon, who was a rabbi. And he claimed to have received the Zohar. That he was copying down an ancient lost book that he found, and he started out by distributing his writings, the Zohar, he said were from this ancient lost book, in little pamphlet forms all around Spain. He lived in Spain in the 1200s, in the end of the 1200s, and he was passing out these pamphlets. He also claimed that the words of the Zohar were, though he wrote them, were given to him through automatic writing. In other words, he claimed that he sat down at a desk with his paper and pen, or parchment and quill, whatever, I think it was paper, they had paper then, and just automatically, mysteriously, his hand wrote the words of the Zohar. Now, the Zohar is a commentary on the Torah. It's a reinterpretation of the Torah, and the characters in the Zohar are familiar biblical characters, most notably the patriarchs and the matriarchs, Abraham and Sarah and the rest. But there's also a rabbi named Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Simon son of Yochai, who is the main character, the hero of the Zohar. And Rabbi Shimon travels the land of Israel, mostly in the Galilee, with his band of merry followers, and they travel the land uncovering secrets of the Torah that were heretofore unknown, and relating them through parables and stories. So in the context of this class, it's really Jewish folklore in its, in a very interesting twist of a way, because it's layered, as much of Jewish folklore comes from Midrash and is layered into the sacred. The Zohar claims to be a direct interpretation of the Torah, making it in itself a sacred work. And some people do believe that it's a sacred work. Now, what do you think about this so far? Any thoughts? What?
Folklore.
It's folklore, okay, yeah. And there are people, many noted rabbis who say Kabbalah is, in fact, in the handout that I gave you, there's a quote where it says that that it's Kabbalah might be nonsense, but since it's Jewish nonsense, it's important to know. I think that's in the handout that I gave you. Now, so some people think it's nonsense, but really there are many, many followers of Kabbalah who truly believe that Kabbalah does represent a pathway, a direct pathway to spiritual knowing and greater spiritual fulfillment. And spiritual fulfillment is seen as partnership with God, melding with God, becoming one with God. So there's different avenues for accomplishing that. And the Zohar lets us know what they are by the map of what is called the 10 Sefirot.
Is there a thought that if you can totally understand Kabbalah, you become so much closer to if you can totally understand Kabbalah, to its nth degree, that you will be almost like near God?
Well, that it was what people believe, that if you can totally absorb, it's not only understand, but
Am
absorb. Yeah, well, your voice is on television. And apparently, by the way, we're on the air, if you all would like to watch. We're on, if you have Time Warner, it was channel 35, is that what you said?
79.
Channel 79, tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. And if Fios is Verizon, so that's 35, channel 35. Saturday night, 6 p.m. Fios, channel 35, Time Warner, channel 79. Tomorrow night at 6 p.m.
I'm canceling my date.
It's the local Staten Island station. Okay? Tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Yeah. Yeah. All right. What's the name of the program?
Jewish folklore.
All right, so TV aside, the map of Kabbalah that the Zohar really puts forward through these stories and parables. It's all stories and parables, riddles, you know, what do you call the kind of stories that always have a moral at the end? A fable, thank you. Things like that. It's very confusing to read because, one, it came out in the end of the 1200s, so the language, even in translation, is difficult. It's also deliberately written in a not very clear way, although nowadays you can get several translations of the Zohar that are written clearly with good, clear explanations. So if you are interested, afterwards I'll give you an author who does that, who you can buy the book. Anyway, back to the 10 Sefirot. So the 10 Sefirot, this is the map, and I'm sure this looks familiar to many of you. Does it? You also have it in your handout. Has anybody seen this before?
Yeah.
Okay. It's also known, like the 5 books of Moses, as being the tree of life. And it's a map which explains the workings of the mystical realm and the workings of God, and in a nutshell. So there's 10 elements to it, to this map, and it goes from up to down. Right. Just make sure I'm on the right. All right. So top element, and you have a small one of these in your handout. The top element is called the crown. In Hebrew, it's keter. Keter means crown, and it's the crown. And it's also known as the Ein Sof. Ein Sof means without end. Without end. So the keter, the crown, represents that wholeness of the universe, that wholeness of God that never ends and is what it is. Does anybody remember from the tale of Moses and the burning bush? I am what I am. Ein Sof is I am what I am. In Hebrew, it's Ehyeh, Ehyeh. Okay, I am what I am.
Sometimes I think there's a picture of a human, and then they have different.
Oh, you're getting ahead of me.
Different attributes of the.
Yes, we're going to get there.
Oh,
Okay.
good.
All right.
Did you get that?
Ein Sof,
Right.
a student right there. Ein Sof is the head, the top. Then on this side is wisdom. Chokhmah in Hebrew, wisdom. And on this side is binah in Hebrew, understanding. Chesed, which is kindness. Gevurah, which is power, judgment. Central is Tiferet. Tiferet is beauty. Okay? Netzach, which is eternity or endurance. Hod, which is majesty. Yisod, which is foundation. And Malchut, which is kingdom at the bottom. As you can see, and when you learn Kabbalah, you learn that all of these things are interconnected, and they each balance each other out. And the main goal of Kabbalah is to teach us how to climb the ladder of the Sefirot, to finally have full, not only understanding, because understanding would only just be here at Binah, but to have, or wisdom, because wisdom would just be here at Chokhmah, but to finally actually be absorbed and be one with the spiritual energy that is God.
The diagram is horizontally symmetrical. Is that made on purpose?
Yes. And let me explain why. So it's horizontally symmetrical because it's a ladder as well as a tree. You're climbing a ladder, you're climbing a tree, starting down here. And it also these elements all have corresponding things in the real world. Chachma, wisdom, is also seed. Binah, understanding, is also the mother or the womb. Chesed, kindness, is also love, balanced by power, strictness, judgment, gevurah. Tiferet, beauty, corresponds with what we think of as God in our limited knowledge of God, the part of God that we can know as humans.
Is that prayer?
Prayer could be a way to get there to Tiferet, but it's God. And beauty, Tiferet, balances out the harshness of power and judgment, and kindness and love with a middle ground. Hod, majesty, is maybe where prayer comes in, because it's finding a way to express to Tiferet beauty. Netzach, eternity, endurance, is also that God is everlasting. Yesod, foundation, also symbolizes phallus and maleness, and Shekhinah, Malchut, is the bride and light and the feminine, so masculine and feminine aspects of God. You will find sometimes when you're researching the Sefirot that they are represented in a human form: head, shoulders, arms, your core, not your belly button, but like your core here, legs, genitals, okay? And sometimes you will see that. And think about in your head for a minute of Leonardo da Vinci's picture drawing of the human male and its proportions. The one that he shows, and he has measured out all the proportions of the human. You could fit that into this tree very nicely. It's also sometimes represented as an actual tree of life. It will be shown with these being limbs to the tree and these being roots. Also, each one of these elements represents a different day of the week. And finally here, there's obviously 10 of them, so there's 7 days of the week. It's leaving out Tiferet, Keter, and Yesod. So then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have then Shekhinah, which is the Sabbath, and the other days, and these represent days of the week. They represent numbers. They represent letters of the alphabet. This is all material that goes very deeply into the study of Kabbalah and trying to divine the answers that come out of it. And as I preface this by saying, I'm not an expert. I know that that's what they symbolize. I don't know deep enough to tell you what everything means, except for when it comes to the Shabbat, which is the Shekhinah. So the Shekhinah, we've talked about Shekhinah before in this class as being feminine aspect. Does anybody remember conversations that we've had about Shekhinah? It might have been in this class. It might have also been in one of my other classes, I have to say. So Shekhinah is thought of as the feminine aspect of God. And the Shekhinah is often represented as a tree. Like I said before, she is a tree. Also, the Shekhinah is often represented as a bride. And also the Shekhinah is thought of as light, And the Kabbalistic legend claims that when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, when God kicked them out of the Garden of Eden, the Shekhinah, who is the feminine aspect of God, and in our limited way of thinking, we have to compartmentalize because we're mere humans. The Shekhinah, God's bride, left God and said, you know what, you kicked my children out, I'm leaving you. And that only until the days of the Messiah will the Shekhinah and God reconcile. So it's Shekhinah and Yisod here will reconcile and go on to Ein Sof. So like I said, this is very esoteric thinking. It's not stuff that's easy to wrap your head around. It doesn't make sense. And to, at least maybe to some of us, to people who really study Kabbalah, it really does make sense. There's also, each element is assigned a different color, which interestingly enough corresponds with, you all know in Buddhism, the chakras, that you have your different colors and your crystals of energy and all. Do you know what I'm talking about, anybody?
Yeah.
I was gonna say that.
So in some of those Eastern religions, they have these different colors and crystals which signify different energies. That corresponds right in there with Kabbalah. So like everything else in human existence, there's overlappings between cultures and religions.
Now, the chakra is also used for healing.
Chakras are used for healing, so is Kabbalah used for healing in many ways. You speak up and
And then somebody once gave me a prayer when my granddaughter was sick, and she said, say it a few times a day or something.
Yeah, so there are, you know, Kabbalah is that piece of mysticism, magic, what we don't quite understand, but which we draw upon anyway, because there's something irresistible about it that draws people to, you know, when there's things you don't understand or have no control over, why not believe in something like this? Why not?
How do you spell Shekhinah?
Well, in English, it's Shekhinah.
There's no, it's C.
Khina.
There's no Shekhinah. But then we don't.
So,
Shekhinah sounds better.
everybody with me still? Okay. All right, so back to the real world and practice of Kabbalah. The practice of Kabbalah became very, very popular after Moses de Leon started to distribute his pamphlets. And remember, just from an objective academic point of view, the world for the Jews in that time of history was not very good. They were, you know, being kicked out of a lot of different places. They didn't have stability. There was a lot of persecution, as we have learned in different historical contexts. And so, grasping onto an idea of mysticism and a mystical realm that Judaism could fit into and offered hope became very popular, even though its sources couldn't really, you know, be proved. And there were many rabbis who said that this is really, you know, a bunch of baloney. But it became so entrenched in popular belief that it became adopted, and as religion often does, popular things. Religion is for the populace, and when things become popular, it becomes incorporated into religion. And then especially when the Hasidim, we talked about last week with the Baal Shem Tov, came into popularity, Hasidic teachings really leaned upon Kabbalistic ideas and made it more attractive. And so after that, elements of Kabbalah became incorporated in an even greater level into our liturgy and into our Jewish philosophy and into Jewish stories and folklore. It became a part of the Jewish canon. So Kabbalah is a part of the Jewish canon. It's thought of as that mystical part. And I know that many of you will have learned that you're not supposed to study Kabbalah until you're what?
40.
Age 40. Why is that? Anybody know?
Well, I was actually taught in yeshiva that if you learn it before you're ready, you can go crazy. So just a warning to everybody.
I learned that also, that if you learn Kabbalah before you're ready, you can go crazy. But it's because...
I started at 20 and I am crazy.
We have proof, living proof. Well, there actually were some rabbis who endeavored to study Kabbalah and became so discombobulated by it that they did lose it. Historically, I believe that is fact. But the basis for that idea of not studying it till you're 40 actually comes from a famous sage who, up until the age of 40, was only a shepherd and didn't learn Torah until he became 40 years old. Does anybody know who that was? Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva, at age 40, left his shepherding and his mundane life behind to become one of the greatest Torah scholars and sages of the Talmud, only starting at 40. So, and the other reason is that it was thought that if you had learned Torah up until you were 40 years old, you had your foundation. You already were grounded in a foundation that would keep you on track and not allow you to be seduced by the fantastical ideas that come out in Kabbalah, because it is seductive. Look at today, where we have the Kabbalah centers, where we have Madonna being a Kabbalist, and different people latching on to this idea of mysticism and a mystical way to connect with God. And by the way, Madonna is not the first Christian to cleave to Kabbalah. Kabbalah had great appeal to Christians in the Middle Ages, to Christian theologians. They really hooked onto it, and in some cases, actually, it was an argument by traditional rabbis to not study Kabbalah because they accused Kabbalah of being of giving God different attributes, even more so than the Trinity. In Christianity, there's the Trinity, and in Judaism, we have just one God. There were some who said Kabbalah and giving assignations like this to different elements of God is idolatry. So there were all kinds of arguments about that, but the idea was that by the time you're 40, you were well-grounded enough. You should have had a good enough education. If you had a good enough education to pursue Kabbalah, you should be well-grounded enough in the foundational Judaism to not be seduced by its appeals.
But isn't the idea to be seduced by it and believe in it?
Yes. However, like I told you in the beginning of the lecture, an Orthodox rabbi once said, Kabbalah is nonsense, but it's Jewish nonsense, and so there's value in it. And there is value in it because it is a way of looking at the human-God relationship. And one of the most important pieces of it that comes out of Kabbalah is this idea that God needs people just as much as people need God. And that we as human beings are one with God. And that as human beings, we have a responsibility to do God's work here on earth. That's a basic Kabbalistic philosophy. We have a responsibility to do God's work on earth, and by doing so, we repair what was broken, and I'm going to get to what was broken in a minute. We repair what was broken, and then we hasten the time of the Messianic age where the universe will be perfect. Everything will be perfect. So, I was into the history, and I got a little bit ahead of myself, but Kabbalah became popular. Remember, I was talking about how it became into the popular canon of Jewish thought. And in the 1500s, a beautiful poem was written by a Kabbalist who lived in the city of Sfat, or Safed, it's pronounced in English, which was the center of Kabbalistic Jewish mystical thinking in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. And people went there, much as they do today, by the way. If you go there today, you will find young people dressed with the most colorful yarmulkes and their fringes, their tzitzis hanging out from their clothes. They have blue in their tzitzis, which are not, some rabbis think you're not supposed to put blue in there yet until the Messianic age. They're very, they'll dance in the streets, and it all fits in with this. And still in Sfat, there's still lots of people like that. Artists are drawn there, creative people, musicians. But in Sfat, in the end of the 1500s, there was a rabbi named Isaac Alkabetz, Shlomo Alkabetz, not Isaac. I was thinking of Isaac Luria. He was Isaac Luria was the main rabbi there at the time. He was also known by the nickname of the Ari. Ari means lion, and he was thought of as the greatest mystic of the day. And he had a little band of followers. One of them was this guy, Shlomo Alkabetz, and he wrote a song, a prayer, which we all sing today in Jewish. If you go to Jewish Friday night services, and it happens to be it's the Lachadodi, which I gave you. Lachadodi actually is a Kabbalistic poem. The first thing you should know about it that, like many Jewish poems, the author put his name in the first letter of the first word of each stanza. It's a shin, lamed, mem, and then the next one's a hey. So Shlomo is there. And does anybody know this song?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a song that in Jewish congregations on Friday night, as the Sabbath is coming in, because in Judaism, the Sabbath starts at sundown on Friday night and goes until an hour after sunset on Saturday night. As the sun is setting, this is a song, a hymn that's sung in, I would venture to say, every synagogue sings this on Friday night. It has various different tunes. There's lots of different tunes. There's some small variations depending on if you're Sephardic, which is from Spanish Jewish descent, or Ashkenazi, which is Eastern European Jewish descent. There's some variations depending if you're Reformed or if you're Orthodox in the translations, but the Hebrew always remains the same. And if you take a minute just to read it to yourself, we'll talk about it. Just take a minute though, because I have a lot I want to tell you today, and it's already 11:30.
So would this relate to the kingdom one? Because this is welcoming the bride.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're welcoming the bride, exactly. We're welcoming the kingdom, the Shekinah. And the kingdom, by the way, is the kingdom of God here on earth. Okay, that's what's meant by kingdom. So Malchut, the Hebrew word Malchut, means kingdom. It's kingdom of God, as personified by the Shekinah, who stuck with the humans when they left the Garden of Eden, and not with her consort. So
Do you give out extra credit?
sure, why not? Everybody gets an A on their report card. Okay, so if you read it, you can see in the English it says, "Let's go, my friend, towards the bride, and receive the presence of Shabbat." Shabbat is the Sabbath. So, and actually, Peneh, the word Peneh can also mean face, the face of Shabbat. Observe and recall in a single word. So that's right there, observe and recall in a single word. That's a mystical allusion right there that you need to see and remember at the same time. We were made to hear by the unifying God. God is one and God's name is one in fame and splendor and song. So there they're talking about the Ein Sof being all of these attributes coming together to be one. Towards Shabbat, let's go. Let's travel, for she is the wellspring of blessing. From the start, from long ago she was chosen, last made, but first planned. Sanctuary of the King, royal city, arise, leave from the midst of the turmoil. Long enough have you sat in the valley of tears. He will be greatly compassionate upon you. Remember, we're in exile still, so everything's the valley of tears, but we're in exile. And also, not only the physical exile of the Jewish people from the land of Israel, but also the spiritual exile of the Shekhinah from Yisod, so that we don't, the bride and the groom are apart. Shake yourself free, rise from the dust. Dress in your garments of splendor, my people. By the hand of Jesse, son of Bethlehem, redemption draws near to my soul. Jesse, son of Bethlehem, is a reference to the Messiah, and because the Messiah is to be descended from the house of David, and Jesse was David's father. So rouse yourselves, right there. Rouse yourself. That could be getting up. We don't have to go through the whole poem, but when you take it home and you read through it with this sphirot in mind, you will be able to draw draw connections. Look at the verse 8. To your left and your right you will burst forth, your left and your right. The left side and the right side coming together, balancing, which meant to balance each other out, coming together into tiferet, to make beauty, okay? And God you will revere. Come in peace, crown of her husband, both in happiness and in jubilation, amidst the faithful of the treasured nation. And in the synagogue, for this last verse, everyone rises, stands up, and faces the doorway of the synagogue to welcome the bride into the synagogue. And it is said Kabbalistically that even though God and the Shekhinah are separated during the rest of the week, the Sabbath, the holy day of the Sabbath, brings them together. And for the time being of the Sabbath, they're together. And this is actually mirrored in ideas of human marriage and also human sexual intercourse. It's considered that Friday night a husband and a wife should be together, and that is a very sacred and precious thing, and that through that it helps to bring about the world to come, the time of the Ein Sof, when everything will be all together.
Excuse me, how did that fit in, you said, with the Messiah, 17, by the hand of Jesse's son of Bethlehem?
What do you mean?
Could you repeat that again? You were saying, he's David's father, but how does that fit in with the Messiah?
The Messiah, when the Messiah is born, in Judaism we don't believe the Messiah has been born yet. Christians believe that the Messiah was Jesus. Jews do not believe that the Messiah was Jesus because certain things didn't happen that were supposed to happen when the Messiah came. But the Messiah is said to be descended from the house of David. And so this Lecha Dodi is asking for the time of the Messiah to come, because then there won't be persecution, there won't be poverty, there won't be hunger, there won't be sickness. Everything, the world will be reunited. Everyone will be reunited with their loved ones. The world will reach perfection. And so it's a very Jewish philosophy to pray for that time to come, and that's what this is talking about.
I'm not trying to be funny here, but I think this thing with the sex, doesn't it go on the entire Sabbath, like Saturday too?
It's very quiet.
Either or.
No, because you mentioned
Well,
Friday, because
yes,
that's when
but
you
it's
do
Friday
this.
night is when we do, Friday night is the traditional time, but yeah, you want to fool around on Saturday afternoon?
No, I thought you were encouraged to do
Well,
that.
yes, because the Sabbath is, it's considered a mitzvah, the Sabbath
is not only Friday
is,
night.
because the
I wasn't trying to be
Sabbath,
funny.
no, I know you're not, but, we have to make it fun. The Sabbath is actually a sanctified time, And that, when a husband and wife come together like that, it's a holy thing, a sanctified thing in the eyes of God. Humans are, procreating, and procreation and sharing on that intimate of a level, joining together, is a holy act.
I think that's a good thing for people to convert to Judaism.
For Shabbat mitzvahs.
Verse 8, line 33, by the hand of a child of Perez. Who is that?
Well, Perez also comes from the house of Jesse. So that's a reference to the Messiah also.
There's actually a church in Bay Ridge that has a big Mogen David on the window. It's stained glass. It shocked the hell out of me to see it because I would never expect that. But the teacher that I worked with said that he was from the house of David, and that was the emblem that was from the house of David.
There's also,
Okay.
there's the church downtown, like Mulberry down there, the old St. Patrick's has the star there.
Sometimes churches have it, and
Yeah.
sometimes they also have it because they were once synagogues.
No,
No, it's
The old
supposed to
St.
be like a
Patrick's.
double trinity. Because I lived in New England, there were congregational churches.
The Star of David. Well, it is the shield of, it's the shield of David, the Star of David. It was David's symbol, so. Okay, so as I told you before, Shekinah also is light. And one of the central themes, myths of Kabbalah is that there was a primordial light even before creation. A primordial light that just embodied Ein Sof, all that I am what I am, was just in this, in this primordial light. And that in the act of creation, the light was sealed into vessels, into clay or glass vessels. Mostly they talk about it as clay vessels. And the energy from the light was so powerful that some of the vessels, most of the vessels, all but one of the vessels actually, were shattered by the sheer energy of the primordial light.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark is a movie that talks
He
about
said, don't look at it.
Right, you can't look at it, there's that little bit of light. And the legend, Kabbalistic legend says that when the Jews left Egypt and they carried the Holy Ark with them through the desert, if you recall in the story in the Bible, during the day, what went before them? God went before them in a pillar of dust, and at night was a pillar of fire, right? Light. But there also was this little bit of light, which is also translated, if you go into any synagogue today, over the ark, which is the cabinet which houses the Torah. There's a light that's never supposed to go out. That's symbolic of this primordial light, everlasting light, eternity, netzach. And just a related word to netzach is nitzan. Nitzan is a spark. So it's said that when the vessels broke, the sparks and shards of light were released all over the earth. And that it is our job as humans to find those sparks of light wherever we can and bring them together. And it is said that on the Sabbath, all the sparks of light that have been gathered together for that week, during those other 6 days that I talked about, fly up and join together with the Ein Sof. That the coming together of the bride and the groom on the Sabbath creates the sparks to ascend back into the Ein Sof. So how do we collect those sparks of light? Kabbalistically, we collect them by being partners with God on earth, doing good. Doing good. When you do good and
So
you
that's
help.
the chesed.
That's chesed, exactly right. When you do chesed, you're collecting power of light. Also, when you're doing wisdom, when you're learning, you're collecting pieces of light. You're oftentimes we say education is light, right? So education, understanding, that's when you understand something that creates the light. power and judgment, when you're fair, when there's justice, that creates, that collects up the broken light. Majesty is certainly found in light, and majestic behavior, prayer can be in majesty. And then Yesod, foundation, which, as I said, is the male and the female. There's light in that kind of love and coming together. And it all goes into Tiferet, the peace of God that we can, with our own limited human minds, understand. And then Tiferet sends it up into Ein Sof. That's the basic map of Kabbalah. Okay? So how do we do it? We do it by doing good and trying to be good people and make the world as good a place as we can make it in our own little corner. And each person has a little piece of that, has responsibility for that. So that's the Kabbalistic idea. And Kabbalah, a lot of people have this idea that Kabbalah is meditation and it's, trying to, get yourself higher and higher. It is, but it's also the highest form of doing it is through collecting up the shards of light. But this is from the Zohar. It's, I'll tell you the author after I finish reading it to you. It's a little quote from the Zohar, and it starts out with, like all Midrash does, because the Zohar, as an interpretation of the Torah, of the 5 books of Moses, is a kind of a Midrash. You all remember what Midrash is?
Yeah.
The hidden, behind-the-scenes stories of the 5 books of Moses that are not printed in the 5 books of Moses, but are what was extrapolated to be the backstories by the rabbis. So we first have a quote from Genesis, chapter 1, verses 3 through 4. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw how good the light was, and God separated the light from the darkness. Now the Zohar. Rabbi Yitzchak said, "The light created by God in the act of creation flared from one end of the universe to the other and was hidden away, reserved for the righteous and the world that is coming. As it is written, light is sown for the righteous." That's from Psalm 97. "Then the worlds will be fragrant and all will be one. But until the world that is coming arrives, it is stored and hidden away." Rabbi Yehuda responded, "If the light were completely hidden, the world would not exist even for a moment. Rather, it is hidden and sown like a seed, giving birth to seeds and fruit. Thereby the world is sustained. Every single day, a ray of that light shines into the world, animating everything. With that ray, God feeds the world. And everywhere that Torah is studied at night, one thread-thin ray appears from that hidden light and flows down upon those absorbed in her. Since the first day, the light has never been fully revealed, but it is vital to the world, renewing each day the act of creation." So that's a little piece of the Zohar on light. Note that the rabbi says, "And everywhere the Torah is studied at night, one red thin ray appears from that hidden light and flows down upon those absorbed in her." So giving the feminine attribute in there in the Zohar. And so that little piece is talking about creation and interpreting the Torah's verses on creation. In the beginning, God created light. And we think of that very literally. The world, there was darkness, there was chaos, and then God created something out of it. For the Kabbalists, it's a more hidden meaning than that. The light is all of the Ein Sof altogether. Right? I know it's confusing, but then we have just enough time, I think, for a folk tale.
So, in the regular religion, you can almost think that God created the Big Bang, and you can kind of make a jump, but not in the Kabbalistic interpretation. There's no way you can do that unless you think these light things.
The Big Bang is the shards of light.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Unless you think of that.
That's exactly, that's to the Big Bang theory, to Kabbalists, the science meshes perfectly with the theology. It just, the science just proves the theology. It's not, no question.
If there is such a feminine aspect to all of this, then why do we always think of God as a man?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, I think that's for a whole nother lesson. Because that goes into feminism. And not only why do we think of God as a man, but why in Orthodox congregations are men and women separated? And why are women not allowed to read from the Torah in front of men? And all kinds of questions.
Because way back it was a matriarchal society.
Patriarchy.
No, actually, he's right. Before time, recorded time really, or maybe knowledge that has been lost in antiquity, there were many, many matriarchal societies in which the women were the leadership of the society. But that has long been, most of that has long been lost. Remnants of that were the Amazons, the Amazon tribes in the rainforest. They were a remnant of that kind of matriarchal society. So I want to read you this folk tale. Right? It's a fairy tale. And as we know, what's the definition of a fairy tale? There's magic in it. There's magic in it.
Fable also.
Oftentimes it does have a fable, but it draws upon the supernatural. There's something, magical in it, supernatural in it. A lot of times who are the main characters in a fairy tale? Animals, talking animals, or a king, a queen, a princess, a prince.
Cinderella.
Somebody who's been transformed. They're often transformative.
Fairy.
Yeah, fairy, some supernatural intervention being. So Jewish fairy tales have all of those elements, but the supernatural intervention is usually God or the angels. So this one is called The Eternal Light. And it's a story about King Solomon. And King Solomon is a central figure that shows up in a lot of Jewish fairy tales. Solomon was thought to have a special ring on which was engraved the true name of God, and through that ring he derived immense magical powers. But that's for another day, and we are going to do King Solomon one of these days. But for now, here's the first King Solomon story, The Eternal Light. Now it was well known that in the palace of King Solomon there were to be found treasures unmatched in all the world, so precious and unique were they. And whenever a merchant who sold precious items came from another kingdom, he was taken directly to the king. In this way Solomon had gathered in his palace the most rare and treasured vessels which had been handed down from earlier ages. So it was that King Solomon was very curious when the Queen of Sheba told him that she had heard of a treasure more precious than any to be found in his palace. Solomon laughed, for he did not believe this was possible. Still, he asked her to describe this treasure, and she said it was a precious glass vessel, illumined from within by an eternal light, and that anyone who stood in its aura was filled with a sense of peace. King Solomon asked her if she had ever seen this treasure, and he confessed she had not, although she had often heard of it, nor had she sought it out, since she did not yearn for a life of peace. Now Solomon could not rest after this, for he longed to know if such a vessel truly existed, and he was determined that he must somehow obtain it, for it would serve as the jewel and the crown of his treasures. Crown of his treasures, alike. Thereupon Solomon called in his minister, Benaiah, and told him to gather 10 men together and to set out on a quest to discover if such a vessel of light, illumined from within, was anywhere to be found. Solomon gave Benaiah his magic ring, with the ineffable name of God engraved on it, in case its assistance might be needed. Nor did Benaiah delay any longer, but he set out at once to undertake this quest, for he recognized how important it was for his king. And so it was that Benaiah and his man began their journey by traveling south toward the kingdom of the Queen of Sheba. And wherever they went, they asked everyone they met if they had ever heard of such a vessel of light, but none of them had. At last they traveled so far south they reached a desert, and the men wanted to turn back, for the desert was so vast and barren it seemed to them that they must have reached the end of the world. It was a dangerous desert filled with snakes and scorpions and many low-flying birds looking for prey. But Benaiah insisted they had to search in the desert as well, for no stone could be left unturned in their quest. In this way, Benaiah and his men walked for 39 days in the desert, until their supply of food had almost been exhausted and only a small amount of water remained. And by then, even Benaiah was afraid that the desert was boundless and that they were lost there in vain. And then it happened on the 40th day that they reached an oasis where they found a fresh spring and many carob and date trees with ripe fruit. There they refreshed themselves and gave thanks to the Lord for having rescued them from certain death. And after they had eaten and rested, Benaiah and his men traced the stream to its source, for they wondered whence it might flow in such a barren place. So it was that they traced from the oasis to the desert, where it sprouted forth from a great rock, which stood by itself among all the barren wastes, the water flowing from it as if it were endless. And on the other side of the rock they found the mouth of a cave, and entered there and made their way through it. And when they emerged from the cave, they found themselves in another kingdom. Not long afterward they saw campfires, and when they approached close enough, they heard the speech of the inhabitants. They were amazed to hear them speaking Hebrew. Then they did not hesitate, but came forth and revealed themselves, and in this way they discovered one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, that of the Levites, the children of Moses, which had lost contact with their brothers in the days of the wandering in the wilderness in the time of Moses. And they were as amazed to hear Benaiah and his men speaking Hebrew as were Benaiah and the others to discover them. And after they had prayed and eaten, Benaiah asked them to describe what their lives were like. He learned that they were strong in faith and well versed in the Torah. They lived to 120 years of age, and no son of theirs died in his father's lifetime. There were no robbers among them, nor wild beasts, nor demons, and they did not lock their houses at night. They also had 6 springs whose waters gathered into one lake, and from this they irrigated their land. 6 springs whose waters gathered into one lake. Yeah, I want you to try to listen. There's a lot of imagery in this that goes back to Torah, and then it all connects into the Sfirot. And the lake teemed with all kinds of fish, and they also had all kinds of fruit trees that grew in their orchards. And for each measure they sowed, they reaped 100. For all that they told him, Benaiah saw that they were saintly and stood in the sanctity of Moses. That is why the Holy One, blessed be he, had given them such abundance. Still, they had been isolated for so long and were curious to know how their fellow Jews were faring. So Benaiah told them of King Solomon and his kingdom, and of the wondrous temple he had built in the holy city of Jerusalem, and of the lives of the Jews who lived there, and they followed his every word with wonder. After this, Benaiah told them of his quest and asked if they had ever heard of the eternal light he sought. And to his amazement, they had all heard of it, for they had a legend among them that such a vessel had illumined the tabernacle which Moses had carried through the desert. But like the tabernacle itself, it too had long been lost, and none of them knew what had become of it. Then Benaiah spoke to the high priest among them, who served as their leader, and asked that he join them on the quest, so that the eternal light of the tabernacle would be recovered, and cast its aura of peace over both of their kingdoms, which could at last be reunited. And so it was that this high priest agreed to accompany them. Now the name of this high priest was Aaron, just as Aaron was the name of his ancestor, the brother of Moses. And he told them the legend of how the vessel of light had come into being. And this is the story that Aaron the high priest told. Once, long ago, there was a kingdom which had been blessed with a sacred light which pervaded the entire realm. And each of the inhabitants of that kingdom knew peace in his heart, for peace reigned supreme in its presence, and everything flourished. Then, somehow it happened, no one knew why, that the soothsayers and astrologers of that kingdom divined that a time was shortly to come when the kingdom and its precious light would cease to exist. Then the king of that kingdom ordered that a way be sought to preserve at least some of the enchanted light, for it was their greatest blessing, so that it would continue to exist after the kingdom had disappeared. And all of the king's sorcerers and wise men consulted together in the spirit of peace, since they lived directly beneath that divine presence. Yet they were unable to find a solution for how can light be captured. But then one of them recalled seeing the marvelous work of a craftsman who created treasures out of glass that he himself blew into many astonishing and remarkable shapes. It was said that there was nothing to be found in this world that he was unable to give form to with his breath, and all of the other sorcerers and wise men agreed that he might well be the one who could succeed in finding a way to preserve the precious light, so that at least a small part of it could be saved. So that glass former, the one who's the glass maker, who's the only one who can find a way to preserve the light, is Yesod. Are you following me? Okay. Kind of. So throughout the story, there's the symbol. Though the story at face value says, well, there was a glass blower he was the only one who could retain the light. The glass blower who can retain the light is Yesod. Yesod retains the light on the Sabbath from the Shekinah. So the 6 streams of water that we talked about, these are the 6 streams going into, right? The light is that primordial light, Keter and Ein Sof. So Jewish fairy tales, many of them have their roots in Kabbalah, and would you like to hear the end of the story? Or
Yeah.
Okay, there's 2 more pages.
Keep thinking of Thomas Edison.
All right, yeah. The light bulb. I thought of that too when I read this, but it is after 12, so if you have to leave, please feel free. It's 12:02. So it was a messenger that was sent forth to bring this craftsman to the palace of the king. And when he arrived, no expense was spared so he might succeed in his task. See, the king is Tiferet, is beauty, the craftsman he brought in. Before long, the master craftsman had begun to seek ways to capture the light in his glass creations, but although he succeeded in capturing the air, the light eluded him. Then one night he was shown in a dream the secret of how to capture light, a secret that has since been lost. All we know is that he acted on his dream and utilized the secret and succeeded in capturing the light in 10 perfect vessels, which emerged from his lips in succession. And he brought those 10 vessels before the king and demonstrated that they were illumined from within, for they continued to glow in the dark. And there's Thomas Edison. And all who stood in the aura of those vessels of light were overcome by a feeling of peace that took root in their souls. Now by the time the 10 vessels of light had been formed, only a few days remained before that kingdom was destined to come to its end. Then the king called in his sons and the 3 princes and bade them make ready the finest ship in the king's fleet and to set sail on the Sea of Darkness beyond the region illumined by the sacred light, where no one had ever dared to go. And he bade them to seek out a kingdom beyond their own, in which they might establish a new life, where the vessels of light which he entrusted to them might survive into another age beyond their own. So this is the primordial story. Remember, this is the story that the high priest is telling Benaiah, that this is how this light came into being. So it was that the 3 princes set sail and had passed only beyond the circle of light that contained their kingdom and entered into the realm of darkness, when they saw all trace of their kingdom disappear, as if it had been only a mirage, and darkness was everywhere to be seen. Now it would have been impossible to steer the ship in that darkness, and they would have had to abandon themselves to the currents of fate. But fortunately they had been blessed with the 10 vessels of light, and when they carried them onto the hold of the deck, the darkness around them was illuminated, and they were able to sail surrounded by an aura of light. In this way, the princes were able to discover an island, which was not recorded on any map, for no map had ever been made of the Sea of Darkness. And the people of that island had lived their lives in darkness, for they had never seen light. Nevertheless, they had been born with eyes, although they did not know how to open them, for they had never been used. But when the ship of the 3 princes cast its aura around the island, the eyes of the people opened, and they hurried to discover the source of this great blessing. And that is how they found the 3 princes and invited the eldest to serve as their king. In this way, the royal family was reestablished, as the princes found lovely maidens among these people to take for their wives, and they were soon rewarded with beautiful children, and so too was the precious light preserved on that small island, and men were once more able to shelter in its divine presence. That island kingdom existed for many ages and flourished in its aura of abundance. Then its wise men detected signs that revealed the coming of the end of its era. The king of that kingdom, who had descended from the eldest of the 3 princes, called in his 2 younger brothers, directed them to set out in the ship of their ancestors, which had been carefully preserved, and the king directed them to take with them one of the 10 vessels of light. For he feared that the people would despair in that terrible time if more than one of the sacred vessels were taken away. And the 2 princes set sail, and had not gone very far when they saw the island disappear. And when that happened, the 9 vessels that had remained behind were all shattered, and their sparks were scattered across the sea of darkness, where some became the stars, and others clustered together. And in this way there came to be a sun that shone in the day, and a moon and illumined the night. So here's a Kabbalistic fairy tale about the creation. And it's just an example of how, as I started out the lecture by saying, how people create myths and ways to try to understand that which we don't know the answers to. And that's in essence what Kabbalah is. So I encourage you, if you're interested in it, to read more. This book, by the way, is a wonderful book. It's by Howard Schwartz, who is the preeminent folklorist of our time. He's a modern guy who's collected Jewish folklore, and he's got lots of stories like that.
What's the name of the book?
It's called Elijah's Violin and Other Jewish Fairy Tales.
Comes to mind is Winky, Lincoln, and Nod.
Wink, Lincoln, and Nut. Superman, right? The world, Superman's Earth was destroyed.
Winky, Lincoln is the light.
Right.
And the Nod could have been to ride with God.
Could be. That's a good observation. Thank you all. See you next time.
Maybe it'll see on the, do you know what's next week? What time? Always has something good.